Part 2. Decisions. 7. I couldn't hear it, but Indigo told me afterward the gunfire on the bridge had started to die down, so we probably got out of there at just the right time. The truck wobbled just as we were losing sight of the Chinese checkpoint. It felt as if a gust of wind had caught the side of the cargo box, but then we were clear. My head hurt from the roar of the gunfire and constant adrenaline, but I knew the others were feeling it just as much as I was. "We need to stop and check everybody in the back is okay," Indigo yelled over the cold wind howling through the broken windows. I kept my foot planted on the accelerator. "We will, just not yet." Stopping this close to the checkpoint didn't seem like a good idea. "We need to do it soon," she insisted. I nodded. I drove 15 minutes at full speed, which actually didn't seem very fast in the damaged truck, but at least there had been no signs of pursuit. "There's the on-ramp," said Indigo, pointing into the distance. "Still no one on our tail?" I asked Luke. "No." There was a boarded-up old gas station with a large garage behind it 1/4 of a mile before the on-ramp. I slowed the truck. "We'll stop here," I said. I turned into the driveway without further consultation, but I hadn't slowed enough, and the truck pitched dangerously. For just a brief second, I thought it might roll onto its side. Indigo gave a short squeal as she slid hard into Luke, squashing him against the door. I braked with a jolt, and we were all propelled forward in our seats. "Dude, what the hell?" yelled Luke. "Sorry," I said, looking sheepishly at them. I put my foot carefully on the gas again and eased the truck around behind the gas station to the garage behind it. The doors of the bigger building were open, and it was pretty much empty apart from a few old barrels and assorted machinery. I drove the truck inside and pulled up. Luke and Indigo and I looked at each other. Their faces mirrored what I felt, relief mixed with worry about our passengers. "Come on." We jumped out and ran to the back of the truck. Indigo went to the cargo door of the truck as Luke and I shut the big doors of the garage, concealing the truck from prying eyes. Turning, I got my first look at the cargo box of the truck, and my stomach lurched. The back door of the truck, remarkably, only had a few holes in it, but the sides were pretty chewed up. Did the packed food and gear protect them? I wondered doubtfully to myself. There was a line of 5 holes near the back on the driver's side. They were much larger than the other bullet holes, as were the matching set of exit holes on the passenger side. I remembered the truck shuddering as we were escaping the checkpoint, and my mind flashed to the turret-mounted weapon on the personnel carrier. Luke told me that the weapon it had mounted was most likely a 25mm autocannon, firing armor-piercing rounds. Luckily, the sides of our truck would have been like paper to those puppies as they passed right through it. We were very lucky to have made it out of there with the truck intact. Luke and I moved quickly to join Indigo at the back of the truck. Luke banged on the door with his fist. "Is everybody all right in there?" he called. "I'm going to open it up." There was no response, not that we could hear anyway, and I moved to stand next to him as he readied himself to push up the roller door. He looked pale. I didn't blame him. I was even more afraid of what we might find when we opened the door now that I'd seen the damage to the truck. Luke undid the latch and pulled the door up. It clattered noisily upward and revealed the cargo bay of the truck. It was a mess. Supplies had tipped around and now lay strewn across the floor. Our people looked dazed as they struggled to move boxes and rise off the floor. Everyone I could see was shielding their eyes in the sudden light. Some were moaning, and I could see everybody except Karen, John, Mark, and Brooke. The ride must have been hell on 4 wheels for those in the back, what with crashing through the barrier and into the armored personnel carrier, not to mention autocannon fire ripping through it. "Are you all okay?" I asked, looking around and desperately trying to spot the missing. "Most of us are just a bit bruised and battered," Sonny said. "I think." He winced as he shoved the box containing extra bedding off of his legs. Sonny still looked weak, but miraculously, much better than he had been the last time I'd seen him early that morning. "Where's Brooke?" Ben's voice caused me to glance in his direction. "She was standing right next to me." "Let's get this stuff moved and look for anybody who is missing," I said. "Just pile it all out and to the side of the truck. We can repack it later." I motioned for Luke to join me, and we climbed up into the back of the truck to help people out. Ben stayed inside to help while the others limped down from the truck. Ben found Brooke quickly. Her hand emerged from a pile of debris, and she waved quite calmly, leading him to her. She was fine, apart from a twisted ankle and a sore knee. Relieved, I continued pulling stuff away from the front left corner of the truck and came across another hand. It was a girl's hand, pale and limp. As I pulled away tins and boxes, I saw blood. Lots of it. I knew Karen was dead when I gently revealed her face. Thankfully, her eyes were closed. I felt sure they would have stared at me accusingly if they had been open. There was a bullet wound in her chest, and it was obvious she had been killed instantly. I finished uncovering her, tears of rage stinging my eyes, and then turned to help Luke. We had to make the living a priority, and it was possible that Mark and John were still alive. They were. I think Mark had been hit by a round from the personnel carrier's cannon. He was gravely injured, and his left arm was barely hanging on by a few threads of tendon and skin. He was unconscious, but the bleeding wasn't as bad as I would have thought. Both Luke and Sonny explained that the autocannon probably had tracer rounds mixed in, which may have partially cauterized Mark's wound on its way through. John had not been hit by gunfire, but was in a bad way as well. The falling supplies had crashed right on top of him, and his leg was caught under a large bin of canned food. It was clear the shin bone in his right leg was broken. I'm no doctor, but even I know that a person's leg is not supposed to have an extra bend between the knee and the ankle. We laid John and Mark out on a training mat that we pulled from the truck. Brooke and Samara attended to them, while Luke and I climbed into the truck and covered Karen with a sheet we had found in the garage. We gently lifted her up and out of the truck, and I heard the other girls crying as they watched us carrying her. Sonny walked with us as we carried Karen out through the side door of the garage and to a small stand of trees behind the gas station. When we got to the trees, we paused. "There," Sonny said, nodding his head toward an oak tree on our left. The earth had eroded away from the base of the trunk, leaving a cavity underneath framed by exposed roots. "That'll make a good resting place for poor Karen." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We carried her over and placed her inside. It was tight, and it took us a long time to maneuver her into the cavity, but we finally managed to arrange her body in a halfway respectable fashion. When we were done, both Luke and I sat back on our heels, catching our breath. "She's with Arthur again," Sonny said. "Hopefully, both of them will be happier for it." I grunted a non-committal reply. My doubts about the existence of God had also led me to question the notion of an afterlife. Death is strange in this new world. Before the flu, we had such a fear of it. It was always hidden and behind the scenes. We talked about it only in neutral terms. He passed away, or she had gone to a better place. We sent our dead away to be prettied up, made to look better than they had when they were alive, just so when the funeral came around, everybody could remember a perfect image of their loved one. Then we locked them away in a box underground, or burned them to a small pile of ashes and hid them away, where they would be forgotten most of the time, only to be remembered on rare occasions or special dates. But now, in this new world, death is ever present, and it is everywhere. The reminders of death are impossible to avoid, just like death itself. The thing that surprises me is how quickly we all became used to it. Even then, while Sonny, Luke, and I laid Karen to rest beneath the oak tree, I knew I had become numb to the idea of death. It was simply a fact of life and would continue to be so. I had no illusions that it would ever be otherwise again, at least not for a long time. And I was suddenly angry again. I didn't want to be used to death. Didn't want to get to the point where it meant nothing. "We should go back to the others," Sonny said. "No, wait. Can you go and get the others, Luke? I think we should stop to say a few words for Karen." The day was still gray, and the temperature seemed to be hovering just above freezing. Even though there was no sign of the thick fog which had made the morning's drive such a chore, the clouds looked ready to begin dumping more snow on us at any moment. Within a few minutes, we were all gathered around the makeshift grave. The girls were weeping before I even began to speak. "We're here to say goodbye to Karen, and also Arthur, who we weren't able to bring with us. They were both great. And I can say personally, and I think also on behalf of Brooke, Ben, and Luke, that they both made us feel welcome at the academy. I don't know what waits for them on their final journey, but I hope they find peace wherever it is. That's all, I guess. Thanks." We started to shuffle away, and I saw Indigo suddenly dash off toward a patch of scrappy-looking yellow flowers that were growing through the cracked pavement. I waited while the others went into the garage. She retrieved a handful and went back to Karen's resting place, gently placing them on the blanket. She gave me a sad smile as she stood and came toward me. We didn't say anything. Both of us knew there was nothing to say. We walked a few feet in silence, and then her hand found mine. My heart nearly stopped, but I told myself it was just one human comforting another, even as I hoped it was a sign of something more. After the injured and dead had been removed from the truck, we re-entered the garage, pulled the doors closed, and started repacking it again. When we were nearly done, I walked out through a side door a little way into the overgrown yard and examined the gray sky, listening for the sounds of helicopters or vehicles. Sonny emerged from the garage, joining me. He was looking better, and I marveled at his powers of recovery. It had been less than 24 hours since he'd been shot. "That could be trouble," I said to Sonny, looking at the overcast sky. "If it snows and the Chinese army is looking for us, it'll be easy to follow our trail in fresh snow." "Yeah, it could create a problem," Sonny replied. "And they will be after us for sure. But there's no reason to worry about it. We've got enough things to worry about that we can control, or at least influence. Weather isn't one of them, nor are the Chinese." "I guess that makes sense," I said. We headed back into the garage in silence, lost in our thoughts. I can't speak for Sonny, but I was thinking about what he'd said, about only worrying over the things we could control, and my mind had gone straight to the problem of who would be coming with us. Mark was in a bad way, and it wasn't a stretch to think we might be bringing him out to lie next to Karen before the day was through. He was still unconscious when we got back inside, but Samara reported his heartbeat was strong. Still, he was in no condition to travel. Nor was John. I knew I was soon going to have to make a decision, one way or another. It was one I didn't want to make. The thought of leaving anyone behind killed me. I had all afternoon to think it over, so I decided I would put it off as long as possible. Why was it my decision anyway? Yes, I had been voted leader, but how long did I have to be the one making all the decisions? Sonny was back on his feet now, albeit sore and limited physically, but it seemed even he was deferring to me. I decided not to think too deeply about it, but I wasn't sure I wanted to continue making the big decisions. "We got everything back in place and shifted it around a bit, so maybe it'll be harder to shake loose next time, boss," Luke said, coming up to me. "Inigo brushed all the broken glass out of the cab, too." "Good," I replied. I'm hoping Sonny can drive so I can ride in the back for a while." "You and me both, bro," Luke said, following me to the main doors. I pulled them open just an inch or so and peered at the gas station through the narrow gap. Glancing at him, I could see he looked just as exhausted as I felt. It was the stress and the constant stream of adrenaline, I think, leaving us feeling drained. He also looked dirty and scrappy, his patchy, ginger-colored adolescent beard adding to the look. "Man, you need a shave and a shower," I joked. "Stuff that. When we leave this place, I plan on curling up in a sleeping bag on a mat in the back of the truck and sleeping. Just sleeping. And you ought to talk, by the way." My hands went to my own face and felt the light fuzz of my own boy beard before lightly running my fingers over the wound on my cheek. It had crusted over and thankfully didn't hurt, apart from a faint throb. I must have looked a sight. But what can I say? Priorities tend to change when you're in the middle of an apocalypse running for your life. "You can get some sleep now if you want," I told him. "I was going to see if you wanted to come with me and check out the gas station for any supplies, but I can take Ben or Indigo with me instead." "I doubt we'll find much there," he said, eyeing the station. "That place looks like it has been closed since long before the current mist started. But I'll go with you. Ben is busy worrying about his sister's ankle, and Indigo is already sleeping in the back of the truck." "All right, you and me then," I said, rising to my feet. I patted the pocket with the revolver in it, feeling its welcome weight. "You might want to grab a gun, just in case." "Nah, I've sworn off firearms. I'll get my crossbow. Be right back," he said, and headed to the truck. I fought the urge to argue with him, knowing if it came to a confrontation with military, the crossbow would be of limited value. He returned a moment later, holding the weapon loosely in his hand. The way he carried it called up images in my mind of old-time movies like Robin Hood, except in those it always seemed to be the bad guys who had the crossbows. This time, they would be carrying semi-automatics. "Let's go, man," Luke said, pushing the door open and breezing past me with a self-confident air about him. I shook my head and smiled to myself. My friend would have fit right in with a group of medieval outlaws. I pulled the door closed and followed him across the gravel expanse between the garage and the station, maybe 10 yards across at most. With every step, I worried a Chinese patrol would come rolling down the road. 8. We made it to the back of the cinder block building without incident. The window was boarded over, and the door was locked with a chain and padlock. "Let's try the front," said Luke. There was another door about halfway down the side wall, this one unchained, with a faded picture of male and female stick figures stenciled on the outside. It was locked too, but Luke put his shoulder against it, and with a hard bump, it popped right open. Inside was a simple bathroom, with a single toilet and a cracked porcelain sink beneath a grimy stainless steel mirror. There was no door leading further into the station. "I always hated gas stations where the bathrooms were on the outside. They were always filthy like this," Luke said, turning away with his face etched with disgust. "But you know what I hated more than that?" "What?" I asked, as we continued along the wall to the front. "When fast food restaurants did the same thing. You remember the Hefty Burger back in Fort Carter? They were set up that way." "Yeah," I said, with a nod of my head. "A real pain in the ass. If only things like that were all we had to worry about." The glass doors at the front were also chained and clasped with a padlock. "We need something to cut the padlock," I said, grasping the chains. "Yep," Luke said. "Sonny brought some bolt cutters. I helped him pack them up. Be back in a flash." He ran off toward the garage before I could answer. I heard the faint hum of a helicopter in the distance, back in the direction of the bridge where we had encountered the Chinese. But I couldn't see it, and it didn't seem to get any closer. Still, I was glad I thought of checking for the bolt cutters rather than trying to shoot the lock, which was the first idea that popped into my head. If they were searching for us in this direction and were close enough, a gunshot might lead them right to us. When Luke returned with the heavy bolt cutters, he cut through the padlock and I yanked the chain out from between the pull handles. Other than the padlock and chain, the front door was unlocked. I took another glance up and down the road in both directions. It was still clear, but I wondered how much longer before we saw some sign of the Chinese. I pulled the door open and we slipped inside. It was dark. The boarded-over windows only allowed narrow cracks of light to seep in around the edges. Luke pulled a small LED flashlight from his coat pocket and tossed it to me before pulling another out for himself. "I hope we're not draining the batteries down for nothing," he said, shining his little light along the counter to the right of the door. "What size do they take?" I asked him. "What? What size batteries do they use?" "AA, I think," he replied. "Why?" "Here." I reached down and picked up the unopened pack of AA batteries by my foot and tossed it over to him. "Now we don't have to worry about it." "How long do you think these have been lying there?" he asked. "Don't know. At least a year, maybe longer," I said, as I shone my flashlight around the station's interior. The place had been abandoned, but you could tell that when it closed down, the owner hadn't quite gotten everything out. Various convenience store-style sundries still sat on their racks. Most of the bags of chips and nuts had been gnawed into by rats or mice. "Hey, look, they have a fishing section," Luke said, walking over to where lures and bobbers were hanging. He grabbed a couple of rolls of fine fishing line and several packs of small hooks, shoving them all in his pocket. "What are those for?" I asked. "Medical supplies," he responded. I grabbed barbless hooks. "Those and the line together will allow us to stitch people up if we need to." "Good idea," I said, while grabbing a few small bottles of aspirin from the shelf near me. We were low on painkillers of any sort, and I figured something was better than nothing. Mark was going to need them, if he ever woke up, and John could probably already use some. He'd been awake and in agony when Luke and I had left. "Too bad they don't have anything stronger than aspirin here," I said, looking over to see what Luke was doing. "Yeah, we'll have to be careful giving those out, though. Aspirin is a blood thinner, so we won't be able to give them to the wounded. I got 3 unopened cases of soda here," he said. "I take back what I said about this place not being worth checking. It's a gold mine." I went behind the counter to see what I could find. There were dozens of packs of cigarettes, and a few full cartons as well, but none of us smoked, and this didn't seem like the ideal time to take up the habit, so I ignored them. The till on the register was open and was empty of everything but a handful of pennies, which I left there. Coins were almost as useless as cigarettes. In a cupboard under the register, I found a stack of porno magazines, which would have left me giddy 6 months before, but now were just junk to be tossed out of the way. Under them, I found something much more valuable to us. A revolver. I whispered a triumphant, "Yes." "What did you find?" Luke asked. I picked up the revolver from under the counter, stood up and placed it on the countertop to show Luke. "There you go, man, the mother lode," he said, beaming. He picked up the new weapon and examined it as I pulled my own out to compare the two. "Awesome. It's a different make to yours, but it's a .38 too, so it'll use the same bullets. You can be the two-gun kid now." "Is that from some old West video game?" I asked sarcastically. "Nope, he's a comic book hero from the 50s and 60s, Luke replied. "It was my dad's favorite comic." Replacing my revolver in the pocket of my parka, I checked the cylinder of the handgun I had pulled from under the counter and found it was empty of bullets. I checked it for rust and tested the action to make sure that it worked smoothly. It was fine, and I fished 6 rounds out of my pocket and loaded it up before slipping it into my belt. I decided to continue my search behind the counter. If this keeps up, I'm going to need to get a gun belt and some holsters, I thought to myself. I approached what appeared to be a fire safe built into the counter a few feet down from the register. The safe was unlocked and open a crack, which led me to believe that, like the money in the till, any cash that had been in there was long gone. Not that it would do us any good anyway. American currency was now worth less than the paper it was printed on. I had no idea what the Chinese even called their money, but I figured it would soon become the currency of North America. Knowing that there might be a chance of something more useful than money in there, I reached down to open it. I caught a flurry of movement in my light beam, and a large squealing rat erupted from the safe. I stumbled backward, falling on my backside as I struggled to get away from it. It was as big as a cat, and its squeaks became a hiss as it darted toward my legs. I kicked at it, missing badly, and watched as it darted past me and scurried under the counter. "Are you okay, man?" Luke asked, glancing over from where he was standing by the empty drink coolers. He had a grin on his face. "Yeah." I was blushing, but happy that I hadn't screamed. I never would have lived that down. It was just kind of freaky. I've never really liked rats. There was a shelf inside the safe. It contained a few old ledger books, some yellowed papers, and scattered coins. I shuffled the papers out of the way and my eyes widened. I had uncovered a box of .38 caliber ammo, hollow points, which I picked up and opened. It was about a third of the way full, so I scooped out the bullets and added them to the ammo already in my pocket. The bottom of the safe was a rat's nest, literally, of bric-a-brac, chewed cardboard, small pieces of wood and plastic, paper, and other unidentifiable stuff. I considered digging through it looking for anything of value, but then decided that it was not going to be worth my time. Besides, there was no need to destroy the rat's home, if that is what it was. I carefully closed the safe until it was open only a crack, just like I had found it. Luke had wandered away from the coolers and was standing in front of some gauges and buttons set into a panel on the wall. I came out from behind the counter and walked over to join him. The panel was to control the 3 fuel pumps out in front of the station. "I wonder if there's still some gas down in the tanks," Luke said, as I wandered up beside him. "I don't know. The gauges say empty, but that could be because there is no power reaching them." "That's what had me wondering, Chief," Luke said. "Be a shit fight to pump it out without power anyway, I guess." As he finished speaking, we both caught the sound of tires crunching on the frozen gravel in front of the gas station. We clicked off our flashlights at the same time and scurried over to one of the boarded-up windows. Peeking through a crack, we could see a Humvee had pulled into the lot, and we watched as 4 Chinese soldiers got out of the vehicle. A jolt of adrenaline shot through my system. 3 wore the trench coats which marked them as conscripts, while the last was wearing urban camouflage and carried a modern assault rifle, like the one that I had left back in the cab of the truck. I could see the driver was still in the Humvee. "Balls," Luke cursed quietly. "What if they go and check out the garage?" "If they do, we need to make sure they can't report in," I whispered back. "That means we have to take out the guy in the Hummer first." "That's not going to be easy," Luke said. "Look again. There are 2 men still in the Hummer." "Damn," I said. Luke was right. I don't know how I missed it the first time, but there were 2 in the Humvee, the driver and a conscript. The conscript was standing, his upper half coming up through the vehicle's roof as he manned a ring-mounted machine gun. "That's going to be hard to sneak up on," Luke said. "If he sees us, that thing will tear us a new one. Shit." The camouflage soldier waved 2 of the conscripts toward the building behind the gas station and led the other one toward the front door we had just broken into. We were sitting ducks. Things only got worse as we heard the sound of a helicopter in the distance. Luke had his crossbow up, focused on the door, eyes narrowed. I moved away from the window to crouch behind the end of the counter, a revolver in each hand. This 2-gun kid was ready to go out in a blaze of glory if need be. With a bit of luck, we would be able to take out the 2 coming through the door before we had to worry about the soldiers in the Humvee. I didn't even want to think about the other 2. The sound of the chopper got louder, and through the grimy glass of the doors I saw the officer stop and turn. The building began to shake, and it was clear the chopper was landing. We were cooked, well and truly. Luke lowered his crossbow. He waved me back over, and I joined him. He had a better view from his vantage point, and we saw the soldiers we had been about to engage, plus the 2 who had been headed to the garage, come back to watch the helicopter land. The camouflaged officer walked toward the aircraft as dirt and debris started swirling in the yard of the gas station. The chopper set down about 30 feet behind the Hummer, and the passenger door opened. A woman in a sleek black uniform jumped out with another similarly dressed male. What happened next happened so quickly it's still a blur, even though I witnessed it firsthand. Ducking to avoid the rotors, the woman approached the officer from the Humvee. If he saw her take the pistol from the pocket of her black overcoat as he raised his hand in salute, he didn't have a chance to react. She aimed and shot him through the face, then walked forward with purposeful strides and shot the other soldier through the throat as he struggled to bring his weapon up. Her companion began firing at the two who had been about to check the garage. He managed to wing one, who fell to the ground screaming and clutching his thigh. The other turned and ran, but another shot took him in the neck. He collapsed, dead before he hit the ground. Behind the black-clad killers, the driver of the Hummer sat straight up in his seat and began screaming at the soldier manning the machine gun turret. The woman's companion walked calmly to the soldier he had winged and stood over him before coolly shooting him through the eye. I recognized the woman now. It was Huiyan. I began to yell a warning as the turret on the Humvee swung toward her, but my voice was drowned out by the rapid fire of heavy machine guns. The helicopter's weaponry had been brought to bear on the ground vehicle. The Humvee jumped and quivered as it was torn to pieces by the armor-piercing shells and forced forward against the gas pumps of the abandoned station. The hellfire ended after only about 30 seconds, but there was no movement in the smoking pile of twisted and chewed metal. Huiyan gave a thumbs up toward the helicopter, and I looked over to it as two men dressed in urban camouflage uniforms opened the side door of the chopper. They unloaded a black motorcycle, then got back in and slid the door closed. Huiyan's black uniformed companion approached her and they had a brief conversation before he ran back to the chopper and climbed in beside the pilot. The rotors started turning faster again, and the chopper rose into the air, turning a tight arc before heading back in the direction from which it had come. Huiyan watched it go, and then walked over to the motorcycle and kicked the stand up before pushing it into the shadows at the side of the gas station. She cast a glance back at the garage and then started walking directly toward us. Luke started to raise his crossbow, but I put my hand on his arm and shook my head. He lowered the weapon, but I could tell he was tense after what he had just witnessed. I had the .38s in my pockets with my hands on them when she pulled open the door and stepped into the darkened interior of the gas station. She spotted us immediately and her hand dropped imperceptibly toward the pocket where she had deposited the pistol she had so recently used against her countryman. She stopped, but made no move to draw it. She looked both of us over in a quick and matter-of-fact way that I found somewhat unnerving. I could see she was assessing what, if any, threat we were to her. Even more unnerving was how she seemed to dismiss us right away. "I must speak with Sonny," she said. "You follow him?" "Actually, it's the other way around at the moment," I said. "Sonny got hurt, so I'm in charge until he's feeling better." "Hurt? What happened to him?" she asked. There was no effort to hide the concern her voice held. "He was shot when we went to get the truck you left for us," I replied. "The bullet didn't hit anything vital, but he lost a lot of blood." "But I called the surveillance teams away from there," she said, surprise in her voice. "Too bad you couldn't do the same with the Tigers gang," I said. "They're the ones who shot him." "Damn it. I told him to be careful," she said. "I'm Isaac, and this is Luke," I said. "Luke, can you run and get Sonny for Miss Huiyan here?" "Sure thing," Luke said, looking Huiyan over much as she had looked us over. I couldn't help but do the same. Although she was unmistakably an adult, she wasn't much taller than me, standing maybe 5.5 feet tall, and her shoulder-length black hair fell straight from beneath her tight-fitting black cap. Looking at her black uniform, I could see very few insignias except for the epaulettes on her shoulders. Each had a single gold star, the Chinese Army designation for the rank equivalent to a major. She was thin, with small breasts, but there was nothing weak-looking about her, and she moved with the easy grace of a cat getting ready to pounce on a mouse. "How do you know my name?" Her raised eyebrow and the way her eyes drilled into me told me she was reassessing her first impressions. "I overheard part of your conversation with Sonny the other night," I said. "Why are you here now?" As soon as word of the incident at the bridge came across the radio, I thought that it might be Sonny and his followers," she replied. "I came to see if I could throw them off your scent again." "By killing a whole patrol?" I asked sarcastically. "How did you know that we were here? I'm glad you came, but you must admit, it looks suspicious." "I knew you were here," she said with a slight shrug. "We intercepted real-time satellite data of the bridge incident and its aftermath. I saw the truck pull into this filling station before our technician corrupted the data and passed it along to the proper department." "Who is we?" "We are the group that tried to stop this whole tragedy from happening in the first place, and having failed in that, we are now working to make amends as best we can. We are the Shadow-Cloaked Seven." "Seriously? That's what you call yourselves?" I asked, one of my eyebrows arching slightly. "It sounds better in Mandarin," she replied, with a hint of irritation at my light-hearted taunt. For the barest of moments, I thought I saw her aura of supreme confidence slip a little. "Why you? Why are you the leader with Sonny injured?" she asked. "I think it's because I was the leader of my own little band when we joined up with Sonny and his students," I said. "After Sonny went down, we held a vote to see who would be the one to make the decisions when they needed to be made. We knew we wouldn't always have time to form a consensus. I was chosen. Although right now, I wish they'd chosen somebody else." "Why is that?" "Two of our people are injured too badly for us to safely transport. We have to get out of here soon or risk being discovered. No offense to you for helping us, but your little massacre out there only makes things worse. It's just a matter of time before they're missed. We have to move now, and I don't know what to do with Mark and John." "You should leave them behind," she replied. "It's harsh, but sometimes as a leader you have to make hard decisions for the good of the group. Whatever you do, you need to do it as soon as night falls. That's as long as my group will be able to delay action in this quadrant. And believe me, I didn't have a choice about the massacre. It was them or you. There is no way I could have explained calling them off. Leave your two injured people. If they do not fight back when the soldiers find them, they will not be killed. In fact, they will probably have their injuries tended to." I looked at her dubiously. I had a feeling that when the Chinese army arrived and found what was left of the patrol, they would not be kind to survivors. But I had no option but to trust what she said was true. We had no way to care for the critically injured, but the very fact I would have to rely on our enemy ate at me. "So they'll be tended to and then shipped off to be slaves?" I asked, not concealing the look of disgust on my face. "In the short term, yes," she said. "But one thing my group is trying to do is to get the government to recognize the freedom and rights of the children of America. It is too late to save the United States, but if we are successful, its descendants will be able to live as free and equal citizens of Greater China." Jesus. Greater China? Seriously? I think the definition of freedom that American kids know is a bit different than what you people offer, I said, bitterly. I saw the hurt in her eyes, and I softened my tone. "Look, I know that you mean well, but you have to understand, your government murdered our country, killed nearly everyone in it, and there are still kids dying. Babies. What did you think would happen when you killed mothers and fathers? China gave a death sentence to everyone who wasn't old enough to look after themselves. I can't speak for anyone else, but I'm never going to forgive that." "I understand you're angry, but we're not all against you. In time, things will get better, but for now, resistance is futile. You have to try and avoid capture and adapt to survive. Things can never go back to the way they were. Huiyan, what are you doing here?" Sonny's voice came from the doorway, and we both looked over. "I came to help if I could," she replied, turning from me. I half expected her to run to Sonny, but they looked at each other with almost a sense of mistrust. "There's not a lot I can do, but if you tell me your route from here, I can do my best to keep the searchers from zeroing in on you." "Well, after that performance, I'd say you just made things a lot worse for us, not better," he said, echoing my sentiment. I'm not telling you where we're going. That might be just as dangerous as staying here." "You still don't trust me?" she asked, her voice shaking a little. "Just give me the route for the next 50 miles then. After that, you should be out of the search radius." "I honestly don't know who or what to trust anymore," Sonny said, before looking over at me. "Isaac, can you give us a few minutes?" "No problem," I said. "I'll go keep an eye on the others. I have some aspirin for John. It might help take the edge off." I had decided I would give him the option of pain relief after explaining the dangers of blood thinning. I know I would want that choice if it were me in that much pain. I squeezed past Sonny where he still stood in the doorway and jogged back to the garage. 9. As much as I hated to admit it, Huion had given me plenty to think about with regards to the fate of John and Mark. She was right. I had to put the group ahead of any one of its members. When looked at from that point of view, I really didn't have a decision to make at all. I just had to figure out how I was going to tell the others we were going to have to leave Mark behind. I knew it was the only course of action we could take, but that didn't make me feel any better about it. Maybe I'd ride up front with Sonny when we left after all. I didn't think that I'd be able to sleep with the regret eating away at me. Being a leader was hard. "How's everybody doing?" I asked Samara, who was still crouched on the mat by the wounded. "Mark woke up for a few minutes a while back," she said quietly. "He asked for some water and passed out again right after he drank it. I still don't think he knows how bad he's hurt." "I can't walk and my leg hurts like hell," John replied for himself. "But I'm in better shape than he is. What the hell were they shooting at us?" "Vehicle-mounted autocannon," I replied. "Luke said they were probably armor-piercing rounds." He shook his head. "Here, these might help take the edge off, but they can thin your blood." I pulled out one of the small bottles of aspirin and tossed it to John. "Don't take a lot, just in case. I guess we should be glad more of us didn't end up like Mark and Karen. You're lucky to only have a broken leg, although I'm sure you don't feel very lucky right now." "I do, actually. We all thought we were toast when we heard that helicopter outside and all the shooting. What the hell happened?" he said. I gave him and the others a brief version of the short but nasty clash between Huion and the patrol. John whistled. "Whew. They took out a whole patrol? No wonder she told us to get the hell out of Dodge." While Luke and I had been searching the gas station, Sonny had straightened John's leg as best he could and duct-taped a couple of 2x4s to each side of the brake, a makeshift splint to keep it straight. It would probably work for now, but the brake had looked really bad, and if he didn't have any other problems, like internal bleeding or infection, I doubted he would ever walk again without a limp. It had looked to me like the type of brake that would require rods and pins to hold the bone together. I decided I'd give him a choice. Stay, so maybe the Chinese would fix his leg, or come with us and remain free, but at the cost of maybe never walking properly again. It was a choice that the unconscious and more gravely injured Mark wouldn't get. John chewed a couple of the aspirin and washed them down with water. I glanced through the open back door of the truck and saw Indigo and Allie were both curled up in sleeping bags on top of the raised mat we had set up for Sonny. They were sleeping soundly, so I decided to leave them for the time being and continued around the truck. Near the front of the truck, I found Ben and Brooke. Brooke was seated on a small wooden crate, one of the many things lying around the garage. Ben was sitting cross-legged on the floor next to her. Brooke looked up and smiled as I approached. "How's the ankle?" I asked. "Oh, it's feeling much better since Ben taped it," she replied. "Not going to be running sprints any time soon, but I can walk on it with no problem. I think I just turned it, not even a sprain." "Good to hear," I said, nodding. "How about you, Ben? How are you holding up?" "What's that term you Americans say? Keep on trucking? Well, I'm trucking," Ben said, glancing up at me. "We're not bugging out of here until nightfall," I said. I explained quickly what had happened outside. I was surprised by Ben's lack of response. He was clearly emotionally and physically exhausted. "Why don't you both try and get some rest in the meantime? It looks like Allie and Indigo are already asleep in the back of the truck. I'm sure they wouldn't mind if you two joined them." "What about you?" Brooke asked. "You look like you need rest as much as we do." "I plan on trying to get some sleep when we leave," I mumbled, trying not to think about Mark. How would I be able to sleep knowing what had to be done? I had a feeling that even when I got to rest, sleep would be a long time coming. "Something's wrong," Ben said. He was looking at me keenly, suddenly more alert now that he sensed the friend's distress. "There's something you're not telling us." I felt my shoulders sag as I leaned against the fender of the truck. The metal was dented and scraped from the collision with the Chinese vehicle back at the bridge. I opened my mouth to speak, but didn't know how to start. "Well, spit it out," Ben said. "It's Mark. He's hurt too badly for us to look after him," I said, looking at the dirty concrete floor instead of meeting their eyes. "We are going to have to leave him behind, and John too if he wants, in hopes that the Chinese will find them and provide any needed medical treatment." "That makes sense to me," said Ben. "If Brooke or I were too injured to carry on, that is what I'd want you to do with us. As long as there is life, there's hope, even for a prisoner." "Just because it makes sense doesn't make me feel any better about it. I feel like a bastard for even considering it. The Chinese aren't known for their sense of compassion. It could be a death sentence." I shook my head. "I don't think Luke will like the plan." "Luke's the one who convinced everybody to make you leader," Brooke said. "He'll keep following you, even if you make a decision he doesn't agree with. He's not a wanker." "I've heard that word before, but I'm not really sure what it means." "What word, wanker?" Brooke asked, with a giggle. "Yeah." "Well, at the risk of sounding like I'm an expert, you better let me answer this, sis," interrupted Ben. "A wanker is like someone who, you know." He made a vague pulling movement with his hand. "I didn't mean it that way, though," said Brooke, her face glowing red. "It's the same as what you Americans mean when you call a person a jerk." "Ah, I got it," I said, smirking. "Wanker. I like that word." "Who's a wanker?" Luke asked, emerging from around the corner of the truck. "You," I said. Ben laughed, but Brooke clapped her hand over her mouth. "I see," he said, his eyebrow raised. "Just kidding. Ben and Brooke were giving me an English lesson." "Okay, so they're teaching you the cool words first, then." I smiled and put my hand on his arm. "We should talk about Mark," I said, my tone serious. "You're probably not going to like this, but he won't be able to come with us." I told him my plan. His face darkened while I spoke, and the deep frown on his face told me I was right about him not liking it. But so was Brooke when she had said he would accept my decision nonetheless. In the end, with some dissent, the others in the group also agreed leaving Mark behind was the best for the good of everybody, especially him, although nobody particularly liked the idea. Samara decided to stay too. She wanted to remain behind and watch over him, despite the fact we all tried to talk her out of it. Much to my surprise, a pained John also decided to stay and allow the Chinese to capture him in hopes of having his leg treated properly. "It's too painful, and who knows, if they fix me up, maybe I can gather some information that can be used in the future. I know roughly where I'll be able to find you guys if everything works out." I felt better about leaving Mark, now that John had elected to stay, although I didn't hold out much hope that I would ever see any of them, ever again. Indigo and Brooke tried to talk Samara into coming, but she was adamant, and I could tell that it wasn't only for selfless reasons. It was clear she was tired of running. We unpacked some food and water to leave with them while they waited for the Chinese to find them, and I left the other small bottle of aspirin with John as well. I offered to leave them a weapon too, but it was declined. John and Samara felt their chances were better if they were found unarmed. Sonny had come back into the garage about 25 minutes after I left him in the gas station with Huihan. I heard her go. The high-powered motorcycle was loud, and she was clearly in a hurry. He told us that she'd try to delay the discovery of the missing patrol until the next morning, hopefully giving us plenty of time to get away if we left at nightfall, as we planned. He looked unhappy, and I guessed his feelings for her still ran deep. He said he was feeling up to driving for a while, but it was decided that I'd ride up front with him to spell him if he needed it. Now that the decision about who would stay and go was made, I felt bone-tired, and knowing I had a long night ahead, I finally managed to lie down and fall asleep for a few hours. 10. Luke woke me at sunset. I rose slowly, stretching my sore muscles. The sleep had done me good, but I was still groggy, and there was no way it had been as much sleep as I needed. The stress of the day was wearing on me in ways I had never imagined it could. I don't like stress, but I knew I was in for a lot more of it, at least until we arrived at the safe haven. "Here, you look like you need this more than I do," Luke said, handing me an energy drink from his stash. I don't know where he kept them. I never saw him pack or unpack them, but he always magically seemed to be able to produce energy drinks as needed. "You still going to ride shotgun tonight?" "Yeah, that's the plan," I said, taking the can from him and cracking it open. "Unless somebody else really wants the spot." "Not me," he said. "I'm going to sleep from here until whenever we stop again. I'm bushed. I don't even think another round with the Chinese would wake my ass up once I go down for the count." As I slammed down half the energy drink, he watched me, suddenly all serious. "What?" I asked. "This thing with Mark and John and Samara, it sucks, man. I want to try to talk everyone out of it, to find a way to bring everybody. Anyway, I know we can't, and I just want you to know, I respect your decision." "I know," I said. "It does suck, and if I could think of another way, I would grab onto it instantly. But Mark and John need real medical care, way beyond anything we can give. Samara, though, well, you could see it too. I think she's just tired of running." Anyway, it was their decision. John and Samara, I mean. Mark is the only one we couldn't really help. "What about the safe haven we're headed to?" Luke asked with a hint of hope in his voice. I found it infectious and almost gave into it myself before cold, harsh reality won out in my mind. Even if we get there and find that the safe haven is real, there's no guarantee that they'll be able to provide the medical help to save Mark, or John for that matter. I shook my head. In this case, I think we just have to accept that the possibility of medical care from the Chinese is better than a gamble that there is actually a safe haven. "You think we're on a wild goose chase?" "No. I'm hopeful it's there and that we'll find it. But I'm pretty sure that at some point in the next few days we're going to be on foot again. It's going to be a hard slog even for those of us that are fit and healthy." "I didn't think of that," Luke said. He bowed his head. I don't know if he was quite convinced, but he seemed to accept my reasoning. "Come on, let's see how close we are to leaving." I finished the rest of the energy drink and walked to the rear of the truck. The rest of the crew was packing the last of the goods Luke and I had scavenged into the rear of the truck. I found Indigo in the cab of the truck. "Riding up front again?" I asked her, hopeful. "Of course, this is where the action is," she responded with a playful smile. Her hour or so of rest seemed to have done her a world of good, but then I thought she looked good even when she was about to collapse from fatigue. "Can you shoot?" I asked her. "Yeah, a bit," she said, with a far-off look. "My dad taught me." I took out the revolver I had found in the gas station and handed it to her, along with a handful of extra rounds for it. "You keep this. I already have one," I said. "Two of them take up too much space in my pockets." "Thanks." She looked it over and then held it out and lined up the sight. "Where'd you get this one?" "In the gas station, when Luke and I went and checked it out." "Cool. I'll keep it handy," she said, sliding it into her coat pocket. "Is everybody else all ready to head out?" "Pretty much," I replied. I turned to look toward the back of the truck and saw Sonny rolling the big garage doors open a little. It was dusk and light was fading, but full darkness wouldn't hit for another half hour or so. Samara was sitting with Mark and John on the mat we'd left for them, the food and water piled nearby. The injured boys were covered with some of the extra blankets we had brought. The other passengers were standing around talking quietly, waiting for the word to climb back into the truck. I went over to Luke. "I think we're ready to go." He nodded and Sonny joined us. 20 more minutes should give us full dark. We'll go then." Something was nagging at me, and I decided I would talk to Samara one more time before giving up on her. "Excuse me a sec." I walked over to the corner of the garage. Mark was still out of it, laying on his back, dark circles under his eyes, and John was laying with his head on Samara's lap. He wasn't asleep, but looked pretty exhausted. "You won't talk me out of staying, Isaac," she said, as if reading my thoughts. "I've tried, Isaac. She won't listen to reason," John said in a resigned tone. Perhaps sensing my sadness, Samara put her hand on my knee. "Please don't take it personally. It's got nothing to do with you. I'm glad they made you leader while Sonny was down. You've been great and did well to get us this far. I'm just sick of hiding and running, and I don't like the idea of leaving two injured friends behind to fend for themselves, but I understand why it had to be this way. Plus, if I'm here, at least they'll have someone to tend to them." Samara paused as if weighing her words carefully. "Besides, maybe it won't be so bad with them in charge, you know?" In another time and place, I might have argued with her, but I could see that John was right. Samara had persuaded herself it was the best thing to do. I gave her hand a squeeze. "Okay. I hope it works out for you. For all of you. Is there anything else I can do before we go?" "Well, you could watch Mark while I duck out to the little girl's room." "Sure. Don't go too far, though." Samara pulled herself from under John's head and left the garage. I put my hand on Mark's forehead. He was burning up. Badly. I had a terrible feeling he wouldn't last the night. "Sonny!" Allie's despairing shriek caused me to snatch my hand away. I shot to my feet. She was at the rear corner of the truck, pointing to the opening of the shed. The doors were not in my line of sight as I ran towards her, and joined Sonny and Luke as they raced from the cab. They pulled up quickly when they saw what had startled Allie. So did I. There were 3 figures, backlit by the last light of dusk. Their faces were in shadow. I didn't need to see them, though. In the middle was the unmistakable figure of the leader of the Tigers, Chen. Next to him stood another of his gang members, and the third figure, held tightly by the thug's arm, was Samara. A short blade pressed to her throat. Sonny took a step forward. "Stand still, all of you, or the girl gets it in the neck," snapped Chen. I saw the shape of a pistol in his hand. There was not a doubt in my mind. He was desperate and just crazy enough to carry out his threat. "What do you want, Chen?" Sonny asked over the top of Allie screaming. "Oh, you'll find out, asshole," he spat. "First shut that bitch up." Sonny put a hand on Allie's shoulder and pulled her close. "Hush now. It'll be okay. Go and sit in the truck till I tell you to come out." "Doors!" snapped Chen to his sidekick. Samara gasped as the man dragged her to the doors and pulled them closed without loosening his grip. I took another step forward but stopped when Chen's eyes locked on me. "That's right. Soon enough, Lao Wai." "Somebody put a light on," he said, his eyes fixed on me. I heard movement in the back of the truck, and somehow still working, the light in the cargo bay came on. Chen turned back to Sonny. "Well, here we are again, Sonny. I'm not particularly upset you didn't hook up with us when this invasion shit went down. I probably would have had to kill you anyway. No good having two alphas in the pack, if you know what I mean. Anyway, all that is water under the bridge. I'm even willing to forget that you and your baby kung fu gang led us into a trap that got all my men killed. Maybe you did me a favor. A big group like that was bound to get noticed by the Chinese eventually. What I'm not willing to forget or forgive is the filthy Laowai who killed Jack. Just hand him over, and the rest of you can go wherever you are headed. Based on what I saw that helicopter do, you have friends in high places." "No, not negotiable," Sonny said simply. "Your brother got what he deserved," Indigo yelled as she jumped fearlessly out of the truck and came around to face Chen. "He was going to rape me." "Well, well, well. Jack always did have good taste in bitches," he said, flicking his tongue over his top lip. Unafraid and with fire in her eyes, Indigo stepped forward even as I did. "Come on!" Chen screamed and stepped forward, quickly placing the muzzle of his gun against Indigo's forehead. Indigo froze, and so did I. It was me he addressed next, though. "Another move like that, and I'll put a bullet through her head." I stood there, with adrenaline coursing through my body, frustrated and helpless to protect the people I had been charged with caring for. There seemed to be no way out, but then it came to me. The one and only option I had to get us all out of this situation. "Please, Chen," said Sonny in a calm voice. "We're screwed enough as it is without helping the Chinese by killing ourselves. Please, lower the gun." I was shocked when the leader of the Tigers did just that. He lowered the gun and took a step away from Indigo. I saw her shoulders relax and she stepped back against the truck. "You know what, Sonny? You're right. And in honor of the fact we were once tigers together, I'll let all of you go. All except him." He pointed his finger at me like it was a loaded weapon. "No, I already told you. It's non-negotiable." "Sonny!" I said loudly, interrupting him. "It's all right. He's right. It's the only way. This won't end until I'm dead, or he is. The only thing we need to work out is if he's going to shoot me like a coward or fight me like a man." I saw my words have the desired effect. Chen raised his chin defiantly. "You want to fight me, Laowai?" he asked, incredulous. "My name is Isaac," I said as I walked forward, holding his cocky gaze with my own defiant stare. "And yes, I do. I want to fight you. Hand to hand. No weapons." Chen laughed hard. My gaze didn't waver. Finally, he stopped laughing and looked at me, unsmiling as he used the muzzle of the gun to scratch his chin. "Geez, I don't know, Isaac. You speak of cowards, but I seem to remember you shot my brother with a machine gun. He was armed and in the middle of raping a girl. Like a coward." Chen's eyes flashed angrily. He would have shot me too if he'd had the chance. Chen paused to consider the situation. "All right, Isaac," he said after a few seconds. "Just the satisfaction I get beating you to a bloody pulp before I kill you will make it worthwhile." He looked at his heavy-set partner. "So, if anyone makes a move while this is on, cut the girl's throat and take out as many of them as you can." "Yes, boss." "Isaac, you don't have to do this," said Sonny, stepping between us and holding his hands up like a traffic cop. "Chen, I'll fight you." Chen looked down at Sonny's blood-soaked t-shirt, then back into his eyes.
As much as I'd like to kick your ass for the trouble you've given me, it wouldn't be a fair fight. But if you really want a piece of me, I'm happy to give you a shot. You'll just have to wait your turn.
It's all right, Sonny. I know what I'm doing. Conflicted, Sonny looked at me for a few seconds, then nodded, stepped up to me, and lowered his head. Any means, he whispered. I nodded, and Sonny went back over to the truck, where the others watched on with apprehension. I looked at Indigo and was strangely pleased by the concern etched on her face. When I looked back to Chen, he handed his gun to Zhao and pulled his t-shirt over his head. He was impressively muscled, not an overblown bodybuilder type, but the kind of ropey, hard muscle that comes from years of martial arts training and fighting. His abdomen looked like it was carved from stone, its only blemish a small scar that looked like it was the result of a knife wound. A tiny seed of doubt sprouted in my mind, but I quickly stomped it underfoot. My short time working with Sonny had revived my kung fu skills, and his insistence on the any means principle made sense in this new, savage world. Basically, he had drilled into me the need to use any means, fair or foul, to disable an opponent, to disregard all sense of fair play, to kill or be killed. I knew this would be my first or last test. I turned my back on Chen and walked away from the truck into the center of the big shed. Chen followed. The garage was getting colder and our breath plumed in the air as we faced off. I took off my jacket but left my t-shirt on. Chen eyed me cockily, and I hoped his cockiness might work in my favor. That and the fact that I might have the element of surprise on my side. He had no idea of my skill level, and in fact, probably assumed I had none at all. I stood on the balls of my feet with my knees slightly bent and held up my fists. Chen snorted and stalked straight at me. I waited until the last possible second, then tilted backwards, eluding his flying fist, and stepped back lightly out of his reach. His eyes widened slightly at my skillful evasion, but his face still told me he was overconfident. Stupidly, he tried the same move again. This time I ducked his fist and rabbit-punched him in the side before quickly moving away again. He winced and rubbed his side. I hadn't inflicted any real damage, but now he was taking me seriously. Chen sneered to show me it hadn't hurt, and then raised his fist before coming at me again, this time more carefully. I waited as he slowly closed the gap between us. I wasn't quick enough to evade his next punch, but it only glanced off my chin. Too late I realized it was a feint, and the second punch, the real one, got me in the stomach. Breath whooshed from my mouth and nostrils, and I doubled over as he deftly moved out of my reach. I heard gasps of despair from my group over my heartbeat throbbing in my ear. His retreat was unnecessary, as I was in no condition to counter. Instead of pressing his attack, he took the opportunity to gloat, raising his arms and nodding like a victorious prize fighter. The audience was unappreciative, but his strutting allowed me time to regain my breath. I didn't need to, but I remained doubled over in an attempt to stoke his overconfidence. It worked. Without warning, he stopped his prancing and took 2 steps before launching a vicious roundhouse kick at my head. I rolled under the kick, not quite fast enough to evade it completely. His heel grazed my cheek, right on the crusted-over wound, but didn't halt my momentum. My roll continued, and I punched him hard in the groin as I rolled under him. He fell to the floor, swearing and holding his jewels. Dazed from the blow to my cheekbone, I climbed to my hands and knees as warm blood flowed down my face. I watched Chen warily as he also struggled to rise. Score 1 each, I told myself. I made it to my feet as he struggled to his knees. I waited. "Attack him, Isaac!" yelled Sonny. Even though it felt wrong, I knew Sonny was right. I had to take advantage of him while he was down. Hadn't he done the same to me? I thought of him putting the gun against Indigo's forehead and channeled the rage. I rushed forward and aimed a kick at his head. Perhaps not quite as incapacitated as I thought, he grabbed my foot mid-air and twisted it viciously. I groaned in pain, but allowed myself to fall the way he twisted, avoiding injury. Unfortunately, I fell hard and the side of my head smacked against the cold concrete of the garage floor. I know it sounds cliché, but I saw stars. I struggled again to rise, and to my horror, saw Chen had now made it to his feet. Worse, his eyes screamed murder. I was in pain, the agony of my cheek cutting through the concussed fog in my brain. He waited again, seeming to enjoy my drunken struggle to get to my feet. He knew he had me now. As soon as I made it upright, he danced around me just out of my reach. He bounced on the balls of his feet and pushed his head forward as though daring me to hit him. I jabbed at him. My attempted blow was sluggish. I knew the second I launched it that it wouldn't strike him, and the spry, smirking gangster, apparently recovered from the blow to his groin, ducked under it easily and rabbit-punched my ribs. His strike sent fresh ripples of pain through me, and I teetered a little. Once again, he had skipped out of my reach without pressing his advantage. I didn't fall. I knew if I did, it was over. He came for me again, and I knew this was it. The steely look in his eyes made it clear he was ready to finish things now. I just managed to dodge the first punch, and when the follow-up to my ribs came, I sidestepped it and trapped his arm under my own. He tried to disengage, but I had him pinned. Chen rained blows on the top of my head with his free hand. Luckily, I have a hard head, and I was able to weather the blows. Sonny's words echoed in my mind. Any means. While he was trapped against me, distracted, trying to bash my brains in, I grabbed his jewels through his jeans and twisted them savagely. I know it was a low blow, but this was a fight for my life, literally. He was not going to stop until I was dead. He had already proved he wouldn't show me any mercy. If I was to prevail, I couldn't show him any. Chen screamed, and while he was preoccupied with the agony of his abused nether regions, I encircled his neck with my arm, pulling him into a classic headlock before deliberately falling backwards, letting my weight pull us down. We hit the floor hard, with me taking the brunt of the impact. Winded again, I held on, squeezing my arm tighter around his neck, holding on for dear life, as they say. My dear life. He was on top of me, his back against me as he tried to roll us over so he could break away and resume pummeling me. I quickly used my other hand to lock my right arm in place and squeezed harder. He stopped trying to roll and, spluttering for air, began to elbow me in the ribs, frantically trying to make me loosen my grip. He got a few good blows in. I gasped in pain, but I held on, pulling my headlock tighter and tighter, slowly squeezing the fight and life out of him. It's not like in the movies. It took forever for him to stop struggling, and even when he did, I wasn't game to let go. It wasn't until Sonny came over and patted my head and told me I could let go now that I slowly relaxed my hold. Luke was there too, and helped me out from under Chen's body. I couldn't look at him. While I had won, I didn't feel victorious. In fact, I felt sick. I took 2 steps to the wall and unloaded the contents of my stomach. We heard a clatter as the doors to the garage were jerked open. We turned in time to see Zhao running into the night as Samara fell to her knees in relief. The discarded knife, so recently against her throat, was on the floor by her shaking hands. 11. Sonny patted my shoulder. You did what you had to do, Isaac. As you said, it was him or you. I didn't say anything. I walked back to the truck, past the others, even shaking off Indigo's hand when she reached out to me. Ignoring the hurt in her eyes, I continued to the cab and climbed in before sitting with my head in my hands. I ached all over, but nothing hurt like what I was feeling. Killing a man with my bare hands was 1,000,000 times worse than the feeling I had experienced when I had to shoot one. More real somehow, more raw. In shock, I only vaguely remember everyone saying their final goodbyes to Samara, John, and Mark as I sat in the truck. Indigo told me later that Samara had bounced back quickly from her ordeal and had told her to thank me. As wrapped up in my own little ball of misery as I was, I barely registered the others getting into the cargo hold of the truck. Finally, Sonny climbed into the driver's seat and handed me my pistol and parka. I put on the parka mechanically and slipped the revolver into my pocket as Indigo, true to her word, climbed in and settled next to me. She didn't say anything, just handed me a rag for my cheek, and then put her hands in her lap. Looking in the one remaining mirror on the passenger side of the cab, she said to Sonny, "You should be able to go straight back." "Okay," he said, putting the truck in reverse and gently pressing down on the gas pedal. He made it on the first try and turned the truck around in the gas station's lot, stopping at the exit before glancing at me. "The freeway is to the right?" I knew he was trying to distract me, and I was grateful. "Yeah, left would take us back to the bridge, and we don't want to go there," I said. "Beyond that, I'm going to be fairly useless. Luke and his atlas are what I relied upon for navigation." "It's a good thing he left this up here, then," Indigo said, holding up the battered road atlas Luke had taken from Walmart on the day that seemed so long ago. God, has it really only been 2 weeks since we left Fort Carter? I asked myself. It seemed like a year. "Excellent," Sonny said, and pulled the truck to a stop. He quickly perused the atlas before heading off. We reached the on-ramp in quick time, but to my surprise, Sonny passed it and turned under the freeway at the next cross street, then kept barreling up Highway 140 as fast as he dared push the truck through the icy night. The truck cab was cold given the lack of side windows. I had been prepared for this, of course, having driven like that during the day, but at night it was accentuated by the plunging temperatures. I zipped up the bottom part of my parka hood to cover my lower face and found myself wishing that I had some ski goggles to help keep the wind off my eyes. "This road will lead back to the freeway and allow us to avoid the big semicircular loop up by Fitchburg and Leominster," Sonny said. "We'll get on the 2 just past Leominster and take it to 202, which will take us up to Concord, New Hampshire. From there we can take I-93 north to where we are headed." "Looks like you don't need a navigator after all. I was thinking we should dump the truck sometime before we get too close to Drake Mountain," I said. "We don't want to make it too easy for the Chinese to track us when they find the truck." "Good thinking," he replied. "There's a town I remember being about 10 miles before Lincoln, where we turn off to head for the ski lodge. Compton or Campton, something like that. We can find a place to hide the truck there." "Campton," Indigo said, shining a light on the atlas in her hand and looking at the Interstate 93 corridor through New Hampshire. "How long do you think it'll take us to get there?" "If my memory is right, and we don't run into any more trouble, I think we should get to Campton inside of 4 hours." "I'm not sure how realistic an expectation of not running into trouble is," I said. "Concord is a decent-sized town, so we should probably plan on there being a Chinese military presence based there. That means they could be in the area." "You're probably right. We probably shouldn't count on getting to Campton until well after daybreak. Damn, it's cold riding up here," he said after a few minutes of silence. "I should have told you I was still too weak to drive." "It's colder now than it was this morning," I acknowledged. "But at least you have gloves. I drove without them today and my fingers are still freezer burned." "They aren't turning black or anything, are they?" Indigo asked with real concern in her voice. "My Uncle Joe got frostbite in his foot a few years back, and they had to cut off 3 of his toes." "No, nothing like that," I said, smiling. Their small talk had managed to put what had just happened with Chen to the back of my mind, and I thanked fate, or karma, or whatever the hell had helped me to find these people. "The weather should give us an advantage, though, right?" Indigo asked. "Being cold and all, China is a warm place, right? So these Chinese soldiers won't be used to the cold." "Not really," Sonny told her. "China is a big country, and it has all of the same climate bands that the United States does. While soldiers from South China might not be acclimatized to the cold, those coming from Manchuria will find that the weather is very similar to home at this time of year." "Oh," Indigo said, her teeth chattering. I shuffled closer to her for warmth, unable to work up the courage to put my arm around her. "Sonny, I was sure glad to see your girlfriend today." "Huion hasn't been my girlfriend for a long time now," Sonny replied. "I wasn't all that happy to see her because it meant that she was putting herself at risk for us. If she hadn't showed up when she did, we would have been screwed," I said. "We still might be screwed. When that decimated patrol is located, the search for us will heat up big time. It was foolish of her to come to our rescue if what she says about her and her group—" "The Shadow-Cloaked Seven," I said, making my voice as ominous as possible. "Yes, them," he said, apparently missing the joke. "If what she says about them and what they are trying to do is true, then as much as I hate to say it, they are much more important than we are in the scheme of things." We rode on in silence as the headlights, miraculously still working after all the punishment the truck had received, illuminated the tiny snowflakes that began drifting down from the night sky. 12. I have to admit, I don't remember much of the drive until we hit the freeway just outside of Leominster. I remember talking to both Sonny and Indigo, but the specifics of our conversations are not as clear as many of my other memories from that period. I was probably in a state of shock. I was definitely in a state of shock. I vaguely remember Indigo pulling a first aid kit out of the glove box and cleaning the wound on my cheek. Even the sting of the alcohol she used did not seem to cut through the fog in my brain. One thing that did rattle around my brain was the knowledge I had just killed another person with my bare hands, and although I know there had been no choice, it was still something that weighed heavily on me. If things went to plan, we would reach our destination, but it was hard to care when I couldn't get the sounds of Chen choking to death out of my head. My hand shook for a long time afterwards. It was definitely not like the movies, where the hero would by now be cuddled up with the girl of his dreams. Well, the girl of my dreams was beside me, and we were kind of cuddled up, but more through the need to keep warm than anything else. After a while, the shock began to wear off, and I even got a couple of hours of fitful sleep. When I awoke again, Indigo was drowsing, and I found my thoughts drifting hopefully toward the future. The prospect of getting to the safe haven and settling down into some sort of normalcy was exciting for me, and I began to fantasize about how it might go down and what it might be like there. Of course, things could never go back to normal. Normal was gone. Hell on earth was normal now. I guess I had one advantage over the others. My normal had already changed forever before the Chinese released the Pyongyang flu virus. By the time the adults started dying, I had already become accustomed to adapting to new situations. Despite the fact the heater was blazing, the lack of windows made certain the cab of the truck was like a refrigerator. As much as I wanted to keep Indigo snuggled against me, by the time we got to the freeway, I was leaning forward in the passenger seat, my hands cupped around the heating vent on my side. The snow was falling heavier the further north we traveled, and I began fearing it would make us easy to track from the air. It's funny how the same fears which had plagued me while we were walking through the woods after losing Sarah would return to unsettle me as we drove north nearly 2 weeks later. I thought of Sarah, who'd made sure we all had fun during her last night on Earth. Such a waste. From her, my mind drifted to the others we had lost, Arthur and Karen, and those we had left behind, John, Samara, and Mark. The last 3 were still alive when we left them, and I hoped they were still okay. But regret at leaving them still ate at me, even though, before the confrontation with Chen, I thought I had come to grips with that choice. A fresh wave of anger at the Chinese washed over me. "Are you all right?" Indigo said, leaning forward beside me. I guess she had noticed my clenched jaw. "You seem down. Is everything okay?" "Nothing is okay," I snapped, instantly regretting my tone. None of this was her fault. "Sorry. It's just that everything sucks, and by everything, I mean everything." "Oh, come on now," she replied. "When life gives you lemons, what do? Throw them away." I had never liked that dumb saying. "No, you don't. You make lemonade," she said. "If you throw them away, you end up with nothing. At least with the lemonade, you have something." "What if life doesn't give you any sugar to make your damn lemonade?" I said, probably a bit more gruffly than I meant to. "Then you're just going to have a glass of sour lemon juice." "Wow," said Indigo. "I wish Luke was here to say something profound from a video game and make you feel better." "He does have a knack for doing that, doesn't he?" I said, finally cracking a smile. "Hey, you have a Chinese guy here. Words of wisdom can flow from my mouth too, you know." Sonny joined in. "Lao Tzu, Confucius, fortune cookies, pick your poison. What's bothering you, Isaac?" I took a second to think about it. Sadness over the ones we lost, I guess. And also Samara, Mark, and John. Oh, and not to mention killing someone with my bare hands. That about sums it up, I think. "Look, I know it doesn't help, but you said it back at the garage. Chen wasn't going to quit until one of you was dead, and I, for one, am glad you came through." "Me too," said Indigo, as her hand found mine. Sonny glanced at us, and I felt myself blush before he quickly looked back to the road. "All right, how about this for words of wisdom, then? Give sorrow words. The grief that does not speak whispers the o'er-fraught heart and bids it break," Sonny said. We were all watching the road. The headlights lit up the snow as it drifted to the ground, and I was thankful that it wasn't me driving. Luckily, it wasn't too thick on the road, though. "Who said that? Confucius or Lao Tzu?" Indigo asked. "Neither one," Sonny laughed. "It's from Shakespeare. It means that you should talk about what's eating you up inside before it consumes you." I told them about Sarah then. Both of them had heard me talk of her before, Indigo more so than Sonny because I had told her of Sarah's death during one of our long conversations. But this time I told the whole story. From the first time Luke and I had seen her, held captive by the looters, until she had been killed by the pack of feral dogs. I didn't know whether it was the stress of what had happened earlier, or whether it was just plain exhaustion. But by the time I had gotten to the dog attack, I was on the verge of tears, and they started to flow as I described our group tending to her in front of the fire. "None of it was your fault," Indigo said, putting her arm around my shoulder. "I know it hurts to lose people, especially those people you feel responsible for. But sometimes, especially now, bad things happen, and it's not your fault." I nodded and took my hand away, and she put hers into her lap. "What about Karen?" I asked her. "I don't just feel responsible for her. Being the leader, I was responsible for her, and yet she's dead as well." I glanced over at Sonny. "Because of my decisions, I endangered all of you in the back of the truck, and we're lucky that only one of us was killed by the fire from that roadblock. Everybody in the truck, front and back, knew that we were going to be at risk when we left the academy," Sonny said. "Karen more than most, because her boyfriend had just been killed. She told me she didn't think we were going to make it, and sadly in her case it turned out to be prophetic." He took his eyes off the road for a moment to look at me. "Instead of thinking to yourself that your actions cost Karen her life, you need to understand that those same actions saved the lives of the rest of us. But she trusted me to keep her safe. You all did." "No, don't you see? That's where you're wrong," Sonny said. "We trusted you to try. Nothing more. We accepted the risk when we loaded up into the truck. We could have stayed at the academy if we chose to, but if we had, we'd be dead now at the hands of the tigers or the Chinese." "About that," I said, running my coat sleeve across my cheeks to dry up the tear tracks, which were quickly icing over. "When Chen was trying to get into the academy, he said you owed him and honor demanded you uphold your vows to him. You were a tiger once, right?" "Not really.
But when I first moved to Worcester, I befriended a couple of them who were interested in the martial arts. While I was hanging out with them, Chen, as their leader, would sometimes give me gifts, and he seemed to think that because of the gifts, I now belonged to him. The guy was a complete psycho with little grasp of reality. You saw that for yourself. But he was like that even before the flu. I finally had to cut ties with the tigers that I liked because I couldn't stand the guy.
Was Jack one of the tigers you used to hang out with? I asked.
No. Chen's little brother Jack used to try to get me to teach him kung fu all the time, but I always turned him down. There was something a little off about him. He was too much like his big brother, I think. He just wanted to learn kung fu to be able to hurt people, not for self-defense.
It just had to be him I killed when Luke and I rescued Indigo, I said. I felt some guilt for setting off the whole chain of events when I killed Chen's brother. But the alternative, leaving Indigo at their mercy, didn't bear thinking about.
Sad,
Sonny said, shaking his head.
But not very shocking, given his role models. What about him and the people you've had to kill since?
Indigo asked me. I guess she was playing counselor.
Are their deaths still bothering you too?
Little, I admitted. But not as much as I expected them to. Not as much as failing to protect Sarah or Karen. I think I can accept that I've killed for the right reasons, in self-defense or to protect others, and I'm okay with that. It's just that Chen, well, that was different. More personal somehow.
As long as it bothers you, at least a little bit, I think you'll be okay, Sonny said. It's when you stop feeling anything about killing that you're in trouble.
What he said, Indigo agreed, giving my shoulder a squeeze of encouragement.
From my point of view, I'm glad this Jack guy, and his brother for that matter, are no longer in the world.
Well, one good thing came out of it. I got to meet you, I said to her, managing to crack a true smile for the first time since we'd left the gas station.
And that's that, Sonny said. What's what?
Indigo and I both asked at the same time, and my smile grew.
We just passed the sign that says, "Welcome to New Hampshire," Sonny said. We made it out of Massachusetts at last.
Well, that's something, I said. Thank God for small victories.
I agree, though perhaps we shouldn't be popping open the champagne just yet, Sonny said. But we've made it further than I actually expected us to when we left. If things keep breaking our way, we might just make it to Drake Mountain to see if there really are survivors there. You have champagne?
Indigo asked, teasing. Sonny said. You're right. There's a long way to go. Not to mention we aren't 100% sure there really is a safe haven waiting for us. We shouldn't get our hopes up, I said.
Since I've met him, Captain Grumpy Pants here has shown he is pretty down on the whole notion of hope,
Indigo said, motioning toward me with her head. Captain Grumpy Pants.
Do you have any wise words that might help him overcome his fear of hope, Sonny? I don't know. Let me see. How about, hope is like a road in the country. There was never a road, but when many people walk on it, the road comes into existence. That comes from Lin Yu Tang. Who's that? Indigo asked. I've never heard of him. Lin Yu Tang was one of the most influential Chinese writers of the 20th century, Sonny said.
Well, Ben Franklin, an influential American, once said, "He that lives on hope will die fasting." It doesn't matter how many roads are made if the people making them are never going to get anywhere, I said, still smiling though.
I see that you can make some claim to knowing the profound thoughts of those who have come before as well, Sonny said, with a short laugh.
Not so much, I replied. I wrote a report about witticisms from Poor Richard's Almanac in my English class last year, though, so I can pull a handful of those out if I need them, but that's about it as far as my famous quoting goes.
Ah, well, perhaps someday you'll be able to match my profound wisdom, Sonny said, smiling. I'm going to have to slow down. The snow's falling so much harder here. I think there's a rest stop coming up pretty soon now. Do you think we should stop to stretch our legs and let those in the back use the facilities? Not just those in the back, Indigo said. I could use a pit stop myself. Yeah, we'll stop, I said, looking out at the blowing snow. But we can't stay too long. We'll stretch, use the bathrooms, and then get on the road again. Sounds good to me, Sonny replied, moving over into the far right lane so he could exit when it came up. No more than 5 minutes later, he was pulling off. The rest stop had a small gravel parking lot, 2 cinder block restrooms, and a snow-covered picnic area. There were 3 picnic tables and a covered brick barbecue. Sonny pulled the truck up in the parking lot close to the restrooms. As soon as he turned the engine off, I opened my door and ran around to the back of the truck before pounding on the door. "We're at a rest stop," I called. "Anybody who has to use the facilities or just wants to stretch is welcome to do so." I unlatched the handle and pushed the rolling door partway up before a hand grabbed it from inside and helped pull it up. The filtered moonlight revealed Ben's smiling face. "I thought you'd never ask."
13. A sleepy Luke and I searched the men's bathroom. We kept the crossbow and pistol at the ready and searched every stall with our flashlights, making sure that nobody or nothing was lurking there to endanger those who needed to go. While we were doing that, Allie and Indigo did the same thing in the ladies' block, Indigo armed with the revolver I'd given her, and Allie with one of the Chinese assault rifles we had. Sonny was waiting in the truck, not wanting to risk turning off the engine. He would go when we were done. "You know I only have to pee because you woke my ass up, right?" Luke said, shining his flashlight into the final stall. "Sonny wanted to stop, and I thought it would be a welcome relief to you guys too," I said. "I know there's no heater back there." "There are no gigantic wind tunnels caused by missing windows either," Luke said, stepping into the last stall and began to relieve himself. "Heat or not, so far my ride back there has been toasty compared to the time I spent in the passenger seat of that truck." I picked a stall and entered, putting my pistol on the square toilet roll dispenser. I looked up at the cobwebbed, semi-open ceiling as I did my business, and was nearly through my long-awaited whiz when a yell from outside made me jump and pee over the rim of the toilet. "Don't move!" It was Sonny. Almost immediately, a girl screamed, but was immediately drowned out by the deep roar of what could only be an animal. Shit. Adrenaline shot through my system as I desperately finished and pulled up my zipper. I snatched up my gun and ran out of the stall. Luke was already ahead of me and disappeared through the door outside. The sight that greeted me was surreal. It was Allie, frozen to the spot just outside the door to the other cinder block building, holding the assault rifle in quivering hands as she raised it and aimed it at the black bear just a few feet in front of her. Now, I know black bears are supposed to be smaller than grizzlies or brown bears, but this one had reared up on its hind legs and looked massive in the small clearing. It was roaring at Allie, and I have to admit, I was glad I had recently relieved myself because that angry bear was terrifying. I aimed my pistol at it and saw Luke do the same with his crossbow. "Don't shoot!" A desperate voice called from our left. Indigo had crept up behind Allie and now had a calming hand on her upper arm. "Don't shoot him." I had no idea if the bear was a him or a her, and I'm not sure if Indigo did either, but the bear stopped its display of aggression and seemed to be weighing up its options now that it was faced with so many of us. Ben and Brooke were near the back of the truck, Brooke staring in fascinated horror at the wild creature. "What do you suggest we do if we're not going to shoot it, Indigo?" I asked, genuinely hoping for a non-violent solution to our big furry problem. "I think we should make a lot of noise, all at the same time, to scare him away. You should fire your gun in the air. That should do it." It was almost comical, but the bear seemed to be listening to her, its big brown eyes never leaving her. I definitely didn't want to kill it. Him. "Okay, after 3, make all the noise you can. If it goes bad, run away as fast as you can, and Luke and I will take him down. Okay?" Everyone agreed in apprehensive whispers, and I could see Sonny looking at me from where he sat in the truck with the door half open. He nodded in approval. 1, 2, 3, now! Everyone roared, sang, and yelled at the bear. Next to me, Luke was doing some crazy American Indian dance and hopping from one foot to the other as he waved his crossbow wildly over his head. In another time and place, I may have burst out laughing, but as if to emphasize the gravity of the situation, the bear again roared, took a step back, and fell to all four paws before swinging his head from the girls, back to us, then to Ben and Brooke. I believe he may have found Luke's overenthusiastic dance particularly threatening, because he turned back to us and bared his teeth. I knew instantly he was going to charge, and I fired my gun over his head at the exact moment Sonny punched the horn of the truck. The next 2 seconds were the longest of my life. The bear froze where he was, his big eyes now on me. I lowered my gun until it was pointing at his forehead. Time seemed to slow, and I could hear my heartbeat in my ear. I began to squeeze the trigger as the horn continued to blare in the cold night. Then it was over. The bear turned and trotted off into the trees lining the rest stop as if he didn't have a care in the world. Gone. As simple as that. I exhaled slowly, my breath pluming in the frigid night air, and slowly lowered my weapon. "Did you see that?" Luke asked incredulously as the others walked over to us. "Why the hell isn't he hibernating?" "He is winter walking," said Indigo. "They do that sometimes." "Thank goodness," said Ben. "Well, I don't know if it was the gunshot or your silly dance that got the better of him, but I think we dodged a bullet there." "Yeah, I don't think it was the dancing, though. That just seemed to make him madder," said Brooke, and we all laughed as Luke gave an encore. We spent another 10 minutes at the stop while everyone had their toilet breaks. Sonny was the last to go as I stood by the driver's door of the idling truck. I snuck a look at the fuel gauge. It was under a half a tank full now, and I hoped it would be enough to get us close to Campton. Ben approached, gazing up at the sky as he walked. "Well, with all this snow and the cloud cover, at least we know they won't be tracking us by satellite, hey?" he said, joining me while his twin sister was in the bathroom. "Might make it easier to track us on the ground, though, you think?" "If it keeps snowing like this, there's a decent chance that it'll cover our tracks by morning," I replied. "God willing," Ben said. "Yeah, as if God cares." "Are you planning to stay up front?" "Unless somebody else really has a burning desire to replace me up there," I said. "It's cold and miserable, but does have the advantage of having windows to look out of." "I plan to keep my place in the back of the truck," Ben said. "Brooke mentioned the same. The supplies are secured better this time, and hopefully there will be no careening off military vehicles and barricades in this next portion of the trip." "Well, Sonny actually has a driver's license, so there's a better chance of avoiding such things. Better than with me behind the wheel, at least." "Don't beat yourself up about it, mate. You were doing the best you could, yeah? And you managed to get most of us out of there alive and in one piece." "Thanks, Ben. That means a lot to me, knowing how you all feel. People keep telling me I'm being too hard on myself." "You are, but that's part of who you are and what makes you a good leader," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. Brooke emerged from the female toilets and began limping toward us. Ben glanced over his shoulder. "I'm going to help Brooke back to the truck. Talk to you later, mate," Ben said, as he walked over and offered her his arm to lean on. I could tell she was still troubled by her twisted ankle, and I worried it might cause some complications later in the night or the next morning when we finally abandoned the truck. It made me conscious of my own injuries. Apart from my stinging cheek, which Indigo had put Band-Aids over, and some general stiffness and sore ribs, I felt surprisingly okay. Sonny returned from his toilet break after a few minutes, and I made sure everybody was back where they belonged and ready to roll. I pulled the roller door down and latched it. Sonny and Indigo were already back in the cab, so I clambered up into the passenger side seat and closed my door. As the truck started and the headlights came on, I thought about the falling snow and how it seemed to bring bad luck to me ever since leaving the Foster's residence. Where would I be if I'd stayed there? Captured by looters? Or the Chinese? Dead? Perhaps. Who could say? "Did you get any encouraging words from Luke?" Indigo asked as we pulled back out onto the freeway. "Not really," I said, chuckling. "Not with all the excitement. I'm pretty sure he thinks I'm not without hope, just a cynical pessimist." "I can see that," she replied, smiling as she put her arm back around me and leaned in close for warmth. "You think I'm a cynical pessimist?" "I wouldn't like you so much if you were," she replied, snuggling closer to my shoulder. "Someone once said there is nothing more pitiful than a young cynic, because they have gone from doing nothing to believing in nothing," Sonny said. I knew he was teasing, but his comment stung a little. That saying was from a world much different to the one we now lived in. "Well, there's one good thing about my outlook," I said, deciding not to take it to heart. "When good things do unexpectedly happen, I get a pleasant surprise." "Like the bear?" asked Indigo. "Yeah, that was good and definitely unexpected." "All jokes aside," said Sonny, "you both did really well back there. You two make a good team." Our eyes met, and Indigo smiled before looking back to the road ahead. After a few more miles, the two sides of the freeway merged together and, with no median between them, became more like a 4-lane highway. Soon we saw roads and even driveways coming directly off of it. We continued traveling north at a speed of about 30 miles per hour. It was all the speed Sonny dared, given the swirling snow and limited visibility. It took us nearly half an hour to get to the town of Hillsborough, New Hampshire. Here, the highway we were following merged with another and turned east toward Concord. We were mostly quiet during that leg of the trip. Sonny was concentrating on the road ahead, and Indigo snuggled against me with her eyes closed. At one point, she began to snore, surprisingly loud for such a sweet girl, so I nudged her a little bit, and she squirmed around and continued sleeping, but at least the snoring stopped. About 5 or 7 miles further up the road, we were going to come to another freeway. "Do you think we should stay on the highway or take the freeway in and through Concord?" Sonny asked as we were leaving Hillsborough behind. "I think there's good and bad about taking the freeway," I replied. "The fact that they have limited access means we have fewer directions danger can approach from." "True enough. But on the other hand, that advantage can turn into a disadvantage because if we do meet trouble on the freeway, there are fewer opportunities for escape." "Also true." "We're taking a freeway out of Concord, no matter what road we take in, aren't we?" "That's the plan." "Then maybe it would be easier to get on here, assuming this freeway connects to one leading north. That way we won't have to hunt for freeway entrances while we're navigating through the city. We just skirt around it." "Sounds like a decent plan, but what if the Chinese have occupied Concord? It seems likely to me that they'd be watching the freeways more closely than the side roads," Sonny said. "Risk versus reward, I guess. Every decision we make has to take those aspects into account. By not taking the freeway, we risk running right into a Chinese patrol on one of the streets of the city with nowhere to run. Let's take the freeway." "You're really starting to sound like one sometimes," he replied, glancing at me with a small smile. "Starting to sound like what?" "A leader." Less than 10 minutes later, we were approaching the on-ramp to the freeway, and Sonny pulled the truck to a stop. At first, I didn't realize why. He was staring at the freeway as it stretched into the distance with an incredulous look on his face. "What?" I began, before it hit me like a slap in the face. We could see the freeway stretching into the distance because the row of streetlights running along it were blazing, the light reflected by the snow. The freeway glowed, a white ribbon in the middle of a dark night. On this section of road, at least, the Chinese had turned the power back on. Indigo stirred between us and opened her eyes. "Lights." "Yep," I said. "Maybe sticking to the side roads and going through the city would be for the best after all."